Welcome to the German Nagoya Protocol Hub's podcast series, Nagoya Bites. Nagoya Bites is all about helping researchers in the academic sector in Germany with understanding their obligations arising from the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. My name is Elizabeth Karger, or you can call me Liz. I'm the manager of the German Nagoya Protocol Hub, or the GMP Hub for short, and I'm your host today. I'm delighted that you've tuned in. If you find this podcast useful, or you'd like to suggest a topic for a future podcast, don't forget to let us know via the contact form on the GNP Hub website. You can find the link in the show notes. Our podcast today is about a very important instrument in the Nagoya Protocol and access and benefit sharing world. We're going to talk about the ABS Clearinghouse. If you don't know what this is, it's an international information sharing platform and the go-to resource for researchers to find out about how to legally obtain access to material in provider countries. The amount of information in the Clearinghouse has risen substantially over the past couple of years, and it can be very helpful to know your way around it. But to be honest, it can be a little bit overwhelming the first time you look at it. Our podcast today is intended to demystify the Clearinghouse. We're going to take a walk through the different types of information you can find there and give you some useful tips along the way. My guest today is Matthew Diaz. He's joining me all the way from Canada. Matt works at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which actually has developed and hosts the ABS Clearinghouse. And he's actually the program officer who is responsible for it. So he's going to help explore the Clearinghouse with us today. Welcome, Matt.
Great. Thanks a lot, Liz, for inviting me to be here. It's a great opportunity to share this platform with your audience.
So we're going to work our way through the Clearinghouse. We're going to do this systematically. As I said, there's a lot of information if you just take a first glance, and for some people, it's really hard to know where to start. Can you tell me a little bit, or give me a quick overview of what kind of information you can find there?
So let me just start by introducing the two main objectives of the Clearinghouse and what its core job is. And that is, firstly, to assist potential users of genetic resources to find the information they need to know about the rules and procedures related to access to genetic resources and traditional knowledge. So that's one of the main core objectives. The second objective is to help the providers on the other side to receive information on how the genetic resources are being used once they leave their country's jurisdiction. And provide them an update on the utilization taking place. So those are the two main things that the Clearinghouse has to do. And we have a lot of different features that can help with that, and different ways that users and providers and can get information. And one is, for example, the country profiles. We have information on certificates and checkpoint communiques and information about access and procedures and ABS measures. Yeah, there are basically three types of information that is stored in the Clearinghouse. One is the national records that are published by governments. And this is all the national information relevant for doing ABS in that country and understanding the obligations you need to comply with to gain access to a genetic resource or associated traditional knowledge. The next category is the reference records. So these records are provided by anybody, including users of genetic resources, IPLCs, people working in different sectors can provide information into our virtual library resources or about guidelines, model contractual clauses, or best practices, or community protocols. So that's and capacity building information. So that's available to anyone. This third category is just the information related to the process of dealing with the Nagoya Protocol and ABS under the convention, which is about meetings and documents and related information like that.
Just for the audience, just in case you're wondering what an IPLC is, we're referring to Indigenous peoples and local communities. Matt, let's just imagine we're visiting the ABS Clearinghouse for the first time. Where do you think we should start?
For researchers, there's two main ways that they can get information. And I think the best place to start would be looking at the country profiles. So if you're interested in a certain country, you can go to the country profile page of that country and find all the information that is submitted by that country and published by that country. So that's a good place to start. The main places that you might be concerned about would be the contact information. So countries all have a focal points. So those are the contact point. They all have information about their CNAs and also their ABS measures. Another feature on the country profile page that might help, what we're trying to encourage, is that we've developed a kind of a tool in the measures format about the key elements of that measure. Because if a country has a number of different ABS measures, different legislations where they address different key elements of the Nagoya Protocol, you can see an overview of all these different records and the key elements that apply. So that's a good place to start. And I think also the search. You can also search by keywords, by different countries, by different common formats, and see information by a number of countries in the search, which might be useful.
So just for our audience as well, Matt referred to a CNA, and a CNA, of course, is the competent national authority. Matt, you referred to this overview of measures. Why is this useful for people looking at ABS rules in a particular country?
Well, for example, India has, I don't know how many measures, but they have a lot of different measures. And it's very difficult to understand from all these different records and the PDFs that go along with them, what to look at when you're interested in a specific topic.
So Matt, you mentioned that all of the Nagoya Protocol countries have a profile there. If I'm interested in getting material from a country, do I only need to worry about the Nagoya Protocol countries, or should I be looking at the profiles of the non-parties as well?
We encourage non-parties as well as to operate and use the ABS Clearinghouse under the same conditions as parties. So a lot of non-parties are not yet ratified parties, so they may be in the process of ratifying or at different stages. And I think a lot of non-parties do contribute information to the clearinghouse. So if a country, regardless if a country is a party or non-party, you may find information about their ABS legislation in the clearinghouse.
I think one example is Costa Rica. Costa Rica is not a Nagoya Protocol country, or not yet at least, but they do have all of their information about access and benefit sharing. So this is important for researchers to keep in mind, that there are non-Nagoya Protocol countries out there that have access and benefit sharing rules. So you need to find that information somewhere, and the access and benefit sharing clearinghouse can be a good place to look. So when I look at the profile, I see the contact details. What are these contact details actually for? You mentioned them a little bit before, but maybe we can look at this in a bit more detail.
Sure, yeah, these are helpful because for users, it gives them a place to start and actually have a contact point. The national focal points, the ABS national focal points, are responsible for making information available on the clearinghouse. So this is information that is about how to access, who is supposed to access. They basically have an overview of their legal framework, and they can help answer any questions about that. So they're a good person to contact whether you have doubts about what the requirements are. We also list information on competent national authorities, so CNAs. They're responsible for granting access permits and can help demystify the steps that are in place to legally comply with their rules and procedures for access. So they're the people that issue the permit. So those are two key contact points on the clearinghouse.
In some countries, and Germany is one example, the focal point has actually a slightly different function to what is described in the Nagoya Protocol itself. So the focal point in Germany, for example, is more active at the political level and doesn't actually provide this kind of practical information to users. This is actually done by our competent authority, which is the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation. So if I'm a researcher, how do I know I'm contacting the right person?
One of the things that we've recently developed after listening to users and trying to figure out, what would help them most is that we developed a new common format, well, relatively new, but it's it's called the ABS procedures common format. So this is a record that we're asking countries to fill out to help them really clearly and in a straightforward way describe the procedures and the contact points for getting access to genetic resources or associated traditional knowledge. So that's one key bit of information that I think researchers will find very useful, and we are in the process of encouraging countries to enter this information into the clearinghouse. It's really what users have asked for, and we developed it in responding to their feedback, but not that many countries have entered it yet. So we're sort of in the midst of this outreach to countries to get them to do it. But basically, if you ask users what they want to know is just how do they comply with the rules and procedures in a country, and that's what this is supposed to do. This format is supposed to give someone just a very clear, practical way on how to get access and comply with the legislation. That's why this procedure can be useful, is because countries can actually add a different procedure for the different procedures they have. So if it's a special procedure for protected areas, or if it's a special procedure for foreign users versus domestic users, or versus non-commercial use and commercial use, it can be all organized and clearly sort of laid out in these formats.
Unfortunately, one of the main criticisms of access and benefit sharing from a lot of researchers is that it's just so difficult to work out what the process is.
One of the other feedback that we have gotten from researchers is that sometimes they don't get responses from focal points, or sometimes there's a long delay in getting a response. And I think this is one way as well that the focal points can help unburden themselves a little bit from getting so many requests and having to deal with so many requests, by just making this information and the answers to their questions upfront and available on the clearinghouse. Because I think this ABS procedure format kind of covers all the basic things that a researcher or someone who potentially wants access to genetic resource, what they need to know, basically, like how much time is involved, what are the prerequisites, who are the contact points, how much does it might cost, what do I need to bring. So it kind of covers how to get access in a very clear and straightforward way. I think another thing that could be very useful, and that we're also starting to, I guess, kind of profile more and learn more about, is setting up these online access systems that are more organized or are done online, because I think that can be a nice way to help guide users and do it in a nice, organized way. And some countries have already started to do this, and they've also linked their systems through interoperability mechanisms directly to the clearinghouse.
I think India is one example, right? Kenya as well?
Yeah, no, there's a few countries that have started to do this.
So sometimes the people listed in the clearinghouse, so it could be the focal point, or it might be the person from the competent national authority, they have a Gmail or a Yahoo account. Now, for a lot of German researchers, this comes as a little bit of a surprise. It's a bit unexpected, and sometimes they're not really sure if this is the right email address or not. Can you just quickly say something about that?
Yeah, not all government employees have access to a national server or email address, and sometimes it's just easier for them to use Gmail or Hotmail or some other provider. So if you see these emails, don't be vexed. They're the emails that have been submitted by the focal points themselves, and it's their professional emails that they use.
So I've heard before from researchers that they've written to the people listed in the clearinghouse, and unfortunately there was no response, or the email may have even bounced. So what can they do if something like that happens?
Yeah, that can happen. I think in a lot of countries, it's a very small team that manages, for example, their ABS portfolio, and perhaps there's a lot of turnover in different teams and things like that. So it can be that either there's a delay or you get a bounced email or whatever. But there's two things you could do. I think it kind of goes for any record that you see any problems with, or you see any way it can be improved. You can always report the record. There's a little feature on every record in the clearinghouse that says report this record, and then you can say why you think it might be improved, or what the issue is, and we will go out and we will try to fix that. So there's that option available to help us improve the information.
Yeah, if emails bounce or there's no response, the German Nagoya Protocol Hub also recommends to researchers that they look for sources of information from other places. So if there's a website or the name of the national authority listed there, that they could try looking on the website of that authority, look for publication and fact sheets about ABS in the country. There are, these days, there are quite a lot of resources out there. So, there are ways to find information. And we also suggest that they contact their collaboration partners in the provider country and ask those people to make inquiries directly with the authorities listed there. This can be one way, or alternative ways of finding information.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a very good point. I think one thing the ABS Clearinghouse has been, developed as a hub for all the relevant ABS information, but even when it's not available on the Clearinghouse or you don't find it there, it doesn't necessarily mean that information doesn't exist somewhere else. And I think sometimes you can Google search, you can do a lot of different things to find information that's missing from the Clearinghouse.
So you mentioned that you can find the ABS rules of a particular country. This is listed under the part about legislative, administrative, or policy measures. That's where most of the information is about the rules. Are there additional resources there that can help with understanding the ABS process?
Yeah, there are. As I mentioned, the ABS procedures is a kind of a practical key set of information that can really help understand how to get access and how the access procedures work in a country and the steps to follow. So that's a key one. A lot of countries have developed a visual or graphic that go along with their procedures. So that can help a lot to get an overview of what to expect and kind of help manage expectations when it comes to getting access. And so that's a key thing. A lot of different sectors and governments as well develop standard contracts or model contractual clauses that they can use and share. So that's another useful information for users to understand when it comes to dealing with contracts. There's a lot of information about that. There's information about Indigenous people and local communities have submitted about their own community protocols and how to deal with their rules and procedures to get access to genetic resources and or associated traditional knowledge. So that can be very useful as well.
Some countries have even developed their own national websites or sort of mini ABS clearinghouses. There are a few examples there. I think South Africa has one, and Vietnam, and those countries have also provided links to those resources in the clearinghouse too, so researchers can follow those links and find more information.
If a country is interested, or anybody is interested in developing any kind of website that would like to include the use of the ABS interoperability mechanisms, I would encourage you to reach out to us, and we can definitely help you or a programmer or whoever give you information on how this can be implemented in a straightforward way.
What do I do if I look into the clearinghouse and there's just no information there about ABS in a particular country? Does that mean that there are no measures in that country?
It doesn't necessarily mean that, no. Some countries have measures, or they've just adopted measures, and they're not yet submitted to the ABS Clearinghouse. So it doesn't mean that they do not exist if you don't find it there. The information that doesn't exist in the Clearinghouse, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist somewhere else, and I think if you come across the case where there's not a lot of information about a country, I think you can always reach out to the focal point. That's why they're also listed there. And all countries have focal points. So I think it's easy to find that information on the focal point, and you can contact them for more information whenever you don't have enough information about a country's ABS system.
Language is also a little bit of an issue in the ABS world. Information is published in the clearinghouse. It's not always in a UN language. What tips or practical tips do you have for people sort of navigating ABS in a foreign language?
The information about, for example, the information like the metadata about a record in the ABS Clearinghouse has to be submitted in at least one UN language, but the actual measure or the actual attachment to that record may be in another language. So one of the things that we've been encouraging, or it's nice, and a lot of countries have provided this, are courtesy translations in one or more UN languages. So that's to help users particularly understand what it is in that measure.
We've been asked about this question as well at the German Nagoya Protocol Hub, and we also suggest that, if things are really in a language that can't be understood or is not easily understood by the researchers, for example in Germany, that this is also a good time to reach out to their collaboration partners in the provider country, someone who speaks this language as a mother tongue, and to ask them to help support them with understanding the procedure and documents, etc., etc. So in the country profiles, there's also this section on internationally recognized certificates of compliance. So what are these about?
The Internationally Recognized Certificate of Compliance, or IRCC for short, it's sort of an international representation of a national permit. So it's something that can be used at an international level to represent an access permit, to be used, I guess, as an evidence as that the rules and procedures to access and use that resource have been complied with in a country. Another thing is that perhaps a national permit has confidential information on it. So the certificates, the IRCCs can get around making confidential information
available to the checkpoint. So in Germany, for example, the checkpoint is, the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation conducts checks. There's a system for submitting due diligence declarations. This is the checkpoint. And it's possible for researchers to refer to their national permit, but they can also refer to an IRCC. And like you say, if there's confidential information that they don't want the authority to see, they can use their internationally recognized certificate of compliance.
Exactly.
At the same time, not every authority publishes all permits in the form of an internationally recognized certificate of compliance. So, I'm sometimes asked, oh, I don't have an IRCC, what do I do? Ultimately, at least in Germany, the national permit is also sufficient to show compliance.
Yeah, and I think, normally a certificate is generated by the clearinghouse when the provider enters the information on the permit into the clearinghouse. And for example, if information on the user is not confidential, then that user will get an email directly from the clearinghouse with the IRCC attached, so a copy of the IRCC attached. But you can also look on the clearinghouse when you see an IRCC, because they could be changed, they could be updated, and the clearinghouse has the most up-to-date version of an IRCC. Each record on the clearinghouse, including the certificate, has a unique identifying number. So if you type in that number in the clearinghouse, you'll immediately find the IRCC or the associated record, and it will give you a notice whether that's the latest copy or an older copy.
And this number can actually be used by researchers in Germany when they submit their due diligence declarations. They can enter this number, the number on the IRCC, into the system.
Yeah, exactly. And the number can also be for provider countries. They should link this number to the national permit or the national permit system. So there's a clear link between a national permit and every certificate on the clearinghouse.
So you mentioned this word checkpoint. That might not be clear to the people listening. So what do we mean by a checkpoint?
All parties are required to set up effective checkpoints. And they set up these checkpoints at places along the value chain from research to development of a product where they might interact with a user. So the idea is that countries set up a system with these checkpoints to monitor the use of foreign genetic resources by users under their jurisdiction in their country. And they perhaps, there's some common examples of where checkpoints might be, which are perhaps funding authorities or patent offices or market approval authorities. And these are places where they have to deal with a user who is in the process of doing something with a genetic resource. And checkpoints are there to collect certain information related to how the user is using the resource and report that back to the clearinghouse, which ultimately gets back to the provider country. So the provider country has some idea about what's going on with their genetic resources after they leave their own country and they've granted access. We've developed a video that sort of is a simply explained video of how this monitoring system works in the Nagoya protocol. So that's available on the Clearinghouse or the ABS website on the CBD website. So you can find that video, and it might help explain this whole system and how the different pieces fit together to effectively monitor or provide some information on genetic resources and how they're being used.
And if our listeners are interested in having a look at this video and understanding this a little better, then they can find the link to this in the show notes for this episode. All right, so we're starting to come to the end of today's podcast. Matt, just one last question. Do you have any sort of last tips or suggestions for researchers using the ABS Clearinghouse?
From our analysis sort of who is coming to the ABS Clearinghouse, we know that users of genetic resources make up the largest portion of our audience. So I think one way users and researchers can get more involved is give us feedback about the ABS Clearinghouse. And for example, from the feedback we received from users, we developed this ABS procedures common format, and now we're getting countries to provide the information in response to that requests from users. So I think it's very useful that if you have any kind of suggestions or ways we can improve, please don't hesitate to email us and let us know. The other thing is you can always, if you find information is outdated or not clear on the clearinghouse, you can always report a record, and then we will address each of those reported records that we get. So that's another way you can help improve the quality of the information. You can also provide information and contribute your own information to the clearinghouse in the form of the reference records, like I told you before. That's available for everybody. So if your sector or your community has developed some sort of model contracts or best practices or any kind of guides or useful information, you can always contribute that as well yourself to the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse is basically just a platform for you and other countries to use. So the more it's used, the more the information is available, the more that it's accurate and up to date, the more useful it's going to be, and it's going to promote this whole cycle and facilitate how ABS is being done. So that's the end goal of the system, is to promote and facilitate ABS for everybody.
Okay, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of today's podcast. So I hope that it's clear to everyone that the ABS Clearinghouse is really An essential tool should probably always be your first port of call if you're looking for information on ABS, but to understand that, the system is also evolving, that maybe sometimes some information might be missing, but there are other ways to find things out, and that you can really contribute to improving the system by giving feedback to the Secretariat. So, Matt, thank you so much for your time and your insight. It's much appreciated. And I hope everyone enjoyed the podcast today.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me.
So, we've reached the end of today's episode, and it's time to say goodbye. Thank you for tuning in to Nagoya Bites. Don't forget to check out the GMP Hub website for lots of other useful information about Nagoya Protocol compliance. And of course, if you still have questions, you can reach out to us through the contact form. What did you think of our podcast? If you have any feedback for us, you can also let us know through the contact form. And if you have suggestions for future topics, you can leave those there as well. For regular updates on the GMP Hub, you can follow us on Twitter, or you can check out the news section of the website. Keep an eye out for upcoming episodes of Nagoya Bites. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.